Deep in the heart of Wayzata, Minnesota, lies one of the biggest family dynasties in America, except you've never heard of their name. This family dynasty made more money last year than Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Chevron combined. In fact, they're the largest private company in the US, and this single company controls a massive share of your food supply. They're responsible for supplying food for some of the biggest brands out there, like McDonald's, Burger King, Kellogg's, Mars, Dunkin' Donuts, Unilever, Safeway, Kroger, Albertsons, Audi, Tesco, and many, many more. Look in your kitchen right now, and you're gonna find a ton of food made by this secret mega corporation. From cocoa powder to cooking oil, salt, sugar, eggs, meat, but you won't find their name on any of these labels. Most of you have never even heard of this name before. That's because this American dynasty has worked very hard to keep it that way. They don't want you to know what they're doing behind their factory doors. Because if you ever found out, you would never buy their food products again. It's that bad. What is the name of this family, you ask? Cargill. Eating processed food from companies like Cargill is a surefire way to shorten your life. Cargill may have started out as a single shack on the side of the road, but today they're a whole lot bigger. Cargill is the largest private company in the US, and if they were public, they would be ranked number 15 on the Fortune 500 list, just in front of AT&T. And Cargill has its fingers in almost every pie imaginable, from grains to livestock to palm oil and coca, to metals, animal feed, energy, and even hedge funds. Their total revenue in 2021 was $135 billion, which is almost double the amount of what other big agricultural companies like ADM, Bunge, and Dreyfus made that year. In fact, this makes Cargill bigger than the entire GDP of Morocco. But if you wanted to buy some Cargill shares, you would be fresh out of luck, because Cargill doesn't want your peasant money. It is not worth it to them. Cargill has purposely remained a private company. For a lot of companies, going public on the stock market is the dream. But Cargill knows that if they went public, they would have to report everything to the shareholders, which would expose them to a lot of public scrutiny. But for what? It's not like they need the money. They already secretly control the food industry. There's a reason why their name doesn't ring a bell. Why? Well, you can't boycott something you don't know about, right? And there's a lot to boycott about. When you own an agriculture business, you're at the constant whims of nature. Droughts, floods, global shortages of seeds, all of that can be a very serious threat to your main moneymakers. What if your primary food export suddenly dried up one day? And that was the exact position Cargill found themselves in 1997 during the Asian financial crisis. See, at the time, Cargill was sourcing a lot of its crops from the Philippines, Taiwan, Indonesia, and Korea. But when Asia fell into a financial crisis, it caused a lot of the agriculture producers Cargill was buying from to close down. Suddenly, Cargill couldn't get soy, wheat, and corn from these countries at the same prices they were before. So Cargill ended up losing $4 billion, which at the time was the equivalent of 8 years of profit for them. It was one of Cargill's biggest losses to date, and it plunged them into debts. Understandably, the Cargill family panicked. So they shook up management and put a new guy in charge to hopefully lead them back to the promised land. And the man they chose to do that was Warren Stolley, one of Cargill's most loyal employees that had been working there since 1969. And when Warren Stolley stepped up as the head of Cargill, he did in fact lead them back to the promised land, but at a huge cost. Cargill needed to dig themselves out of that $4 billion pits. And since one of their most lucrative crops was coca, they went on the hunt for an ultra-cheap source, and they eventually found it on the Ivory Coast. During the 90s, children were being trafficked from Mali into the Ivory Coast for slave labor. These kids weren't being paid, they were barely fed, they were physically abused, and were basically held hostage on these farms. One child slave came forward saying that they were forced to spray pesticides on coca crops without any protective clothing. Others say that they were whipped with branches and left in solitary confinement. According to other reports, children who tried to escape were forced to drink urine as punishment. Others say that their feet were cut open and pepper would be rubbed into their wounds. But the benefit of all this child labor is that these farms were able to produce extremely cheap coca. So companies like Nestle, Hershey, Mars, and Cargill put their orders in as fast as possible. In 2005, the International Labor Rights Fund found out about Cargill's connection to these slave camps and filed a lawsuit against them. As of today, the case still hasn't been resolved, and since then, Cargill has just continued growing their coca business. In 2018, Cargill put together plans to expand their coca storehouses in Abidjan, a city in the Ivory Coast. In 2019, they invested $113 million into coca processing plants in both the Ivory Coast and Ghana, while at the same time, they keep saying they're against child labor in the press. With coca on lockdown, now Cargill just needed some cheap land. Cargill's main business is storing and processing crops, so obviously they need cheap land to grow cheap crops on. Ideally, the land should be free. So to get their hands on some free land, Cargill got involved with land grabbing in the late 2000s. And yes, land grabbing sounds exactly like what you think it is. In 2011, one of Cargill's palm oil suppliers sent a fleet of security guards to open fire on a nearby Indonesian village. The reason? A villager apparently stole a piece of palm fruits, which may or may not have been true. So in response, the guards evicted 100 people from their homes and bulldozed the entire village to the ground. Coincidentally, that land provided the perfect canvas for a new field of palm fruits. A few years later, Cargill's soy producers in Brazil were accused of sending a private security force into a nearby indigenous village. They smashed down doors, assaulted children, kicked pregnant women in the stomach, 7 indigenous people were shot, several women lost their babies, and what was all this violence for? Because one person from the tribe trespassed on company farmland. But if those indigenous people end up abandoning their homes because of this, conveniently these indigenous people never ended up coming back, so their land was up for grabs. It was turned into more farmland to produce even cheaper crops for Cargill to buy up. Sure, a land grab here and there is nice, but in the grand scheme of things, it just wasn't enough. Cargill needed way more land, and conveniently in 2004, a giant patch of natural rainforest the size of Hawaii was being cleared out of the Amazon rainforest. And what did they use this land for? Why, the most nutritious crop out there, soy. Soy was planted on these lands, and it was offered to foreign countries at dirt cheap prices, and Cargill made sure that they were first in line to buy. But you might remember that there was a whole eco-friendly movement that was starting to pick up during this time. Reusable water bottles, fair trade coffee, Save the Rainforest t-shirts, and they did not like what Cargill was up to. So Greenpeace launched their Save the Amazon campaign in 2006, and in response, Cargill publicly agreed to no longer purchase soy from the deforested lands in the Amazon. Cargill even received a special award in environmental leadership for this new agreement. But there was a loophole. Greenpeace didn't say anything about Cerrado, another lesser-known rainforest in Brazil that is still equally important. Cerrado contains 5% of the world's plant and animal species and 8 of Brazil's rivers. So instead of getting soy from the Amazon rainforest, Cargill just switched to getting soy from Cerrado, and no one was the wiser. While deforestation of the Amazon rainforest slowed down exponentially between 2008 and 2012, deforestation in Cerrado sped up. Fast forward to 2018, and Cerrado had lost 95,000 square kilometers of rainforest. That is 2/3 more than what was ever cleared in the Amazon. And the Amazon is 3 times the size, so a giant chunk of the Cerrado rainforest is now gone. So Greenpeace approached Cargill again and demanded that they stop exploiting Cerrado. In response, Cargill put on their best PR face, they didn't overtly agree to Greenpeace's demands, and instead created a Cargill-branded soy action plan. This plan promised that $30 million would be put towards research for alternatives to growing crops on native lands. It sounded very noble, very ambitious, like progress was actually being made, when in reality, this plan was as vague as can be. But it worked. After they presented this plan to the world, they just turned around and went straight back to buying soy from Cerrado. Cargo's argument against not buying soy from Cerrado is that if they moved out, someone else was just gonna move in. Like China, for example, who buys most of Brazil's soy. You wouldn't want to support China now, would you? We gotta keep supporting American jobs and the American economy. Today, Cargo is a huge company. They employ over 155,000 people worldwide. They handle a quarter of the country's total grain exports. 20% of our beef and pork comes from their factories. 6 million tons of sugar is shipped by Cargo each year. And when you're this big making this much money, it can be easy to let things slip through the cracks. In the year 2000, around 16 million pounds of sliced turkey processed by Cargo's Texas plant was recalled because it was contaminated with Listeria, a deadly bacteria. The meat caused 7 deaths, 3 stillbirths, and 29 illnesses across 10 American states. Later on that same year, a 3-year-old died from E. coli poisoning after eating beef that came from one of Cargo's processing plants. In 2009, more E. coli tainted burgers were sent out, this time causing a woman to become paralyzed from the waist down. Why does this keep happening? Because Cargo has discovered an innovative way to save money on their meat processing costs. Here's how. Instead of using expensive cuts of meat to make your burgers, you want to use all those bits of meat and intestines that fall onto your factory floor. Just scoop all that up, soak it in some ammonia to kill the bacteria, throw it into a grinder, and out comes burger patties that cost 25% less. And sure, fecal matter may end up in there every now and then, especially if you're using intestines and all that good stuff. But as long as it's treated with bleach, and the animals are fed human-grade antibiotics to reduce infection, everything should be a-okay. Just package it up and ship it out for the masses to consume.
Can't have a bunch of small players delivering such an important food source to the nation's consumers. You have to have larger companies that can do it cheaply and can keep costs down.